students, let us study the figures of speech from the poem The Inchcape Rock, written by Robert Southey. In the first line, we find that the figure of speech is repetition. The words are repeated. No stir in the air, no stir in the sea. So, the words no stir are repeated. It is repetition. In the next line, there is alliteration of sh sound. The ship was as still as she could be. And then personification is also there because the ship is personified. The ship is referred to as she, and thus inanimate object is personified here. In next line, we find alliteration again because her sails from heaven. The H sound, her sound is repeated beautifully. There is also inversion because the word order here is changed for poetic effect. Actually, the word order should be her sails received no motion from heaven. Now, in the next line, the keel was steady in the ocean. Here, the word her is repeated. Her keel was steady in the ocean. And the line before that is her sails from heaven received no motion. So, repetition is there of the word her in the third and the fourth line. In the next stanza, we find alliteration again because the sound s or the sound of the word s is repeated here. Sign or sound. Now look at the highlighted line. So little they rose, so little they fell. So repetition is there of the word so little they. And there is an antithesis also because two opposite words, rose and fell, are used in the same line to create contrast. Now in the third stanza, look at the highlighted lines. Alliteration is there. Abbot of Aberbrothock. The letter A is beautifully, the sound of the letter A is repeated beautifully here. In the next highlighted line, we find the figure of speech is inversion because the sentence is with incorrect prose order and the correct order should be in the storm it floated and swung on a buoy. At the same time, we find it is a example of personification also because the buoy here is shown as floated and swung. So, the inanimate object is shown as a living object and therefore the buoy is personified here. The quality of floating and swinging actually belongs to living things, but here it is attached to inanimate thing and therefore it is personification. Alliteration is also there. Alliteration of the letter repeated. The letter S is repeated here. The sound of the letter S in storm and swung. In the last line also we have got inversion because the sentence is with incorrect prose order. The correct prose order should be, and its warning rung over the waves. Look at this line. When the rock was hit by the surge's swell. Here, the sound of the letter S is repeated and therefore it is alliteration. And bless the abbot of Aberbrothock. Here again, A sound is repeated beautifully and therefore it is alliteration. Look at these highlighted lines now. The sun in heaven was shining gay. So, again personification is there because sun is said to be gay because he is happy. The sun is happy, that means sun, the inanimate object, is personified here. In the next line, things are joyful. Things which are inanimate, they are given human quality of being joyful and therefore it is personification again. Next line, the seabirds screamed as they wheeled round. Here, alliteration is there, seabirds and screamed. The sound of the letter S is repeated pleasingly. Then the word screamed is an onomatopoeic word, so it is an onomatopoeia. Words here, this word indicates the sound they refer to. In the next stanza, the boy of the Inchcape bell was seen. Here, B sound is repeated beautifully, therefore it is alliteration. In the next line we find inversion because the correct order of the words should be a darker speck on the green ocean instead of a darker speck on the ocean green. In the next line we find alliteration again. Sir Ralph the Rover walked his deck. Here R sound or R sound is repeated beautifully. In the next stanza, he felt the cheering power of spring. Here, the spring season is personified. Therefore, it is personification. Spring season is treated as a human being. An inanimate object, spring season cannot cheer, but human beings can cheer, and therefore it is an instance of personification. In the next line here, we find two words which are onomatopoeic. It made him whistle and it made him sing. The word whistle and the word sing both are onomatopoeic because in both the words sound echoes the sense, or both the words are such that suggest the sound that they describe. Whistle, the word whistle, the word sing, they are onomatopoeic words. Now look at the next two highlighted lines. We find that the words mirthful and mirth are repeated pleasingly, and therefore it is a repetition. His heart was mirthful to excess, but the rover's mirth was wickedness. Here, alliteration is also there, was wickedness. So, was sound or the W letter is repeated here pleasingly. Here antithesis also is there, because mirth and wickedness are opposite words that are used here. So it is antithesis. Quoth he, my men, put out the boat. Here, my men, m sound is repeated pleasingly, therefore it is alliteration. Again here we find alliteration. The abbot of Aberbrothock. The sound of the letter A is repeated beautifully. In the next stanza, the boat is lowered, the boatmen row. So, the sound of the letter B is beautifully repeated, and therefore it is alliteration again. In the next highlighted line we find, and to the Inchcape rock they go, inversion is the figure of speech. It should be, and they go to the Inchcape rock. That should be the proper grammatical order of the words. In the next line, again we find the example of alliteration. Sir Ralph bent over the boat. So B sound is repeated beautifully in the words bent and boat. Here in the next line, alliteration is there again. And he cut the bell from the Inchcape float. So, from and float. Letter F, the sound of the letter F is repeated beautifully here, therefore it is alliteration. In the next stanza, first line, we find the example of inversion here. The words are not in correct prose order. Actually, it should be the bell sunk down with gurgling sound. But the poet says, down sang the bell with a gurgling sound. In the same line, we find alliteration also, because the sound of the letter S is repeated in the words sunk and sound. In the same line, we also find onomatopoeia, because the word gurgling is used here, and it is like a sound that is made. Onomatopoeic words are the sound like the action they are describing. In the next line, the bubbles rose and burst around. Here again alliteration is there. The sound of the letter B is beautifully repeated. Again in the last line alliteration is there. Abbot of Aberbrothock. In the next stanza, in the first line here, Sir Ralph the rover. Here we find alliteration again. R sound is beautifully repeated here. In the next line again we find alliteration. He scoured the seas for many a days. The sound of the letter S is repeated pleasingly. In the last line of the stanza, he steers his course for Scotland's shore. Here, steers, Scotland. Sir sound is pleasingly repeated, therefore it is alliteration. Next stanza, first line, so thick a haze o'erspreads the sky. Here, so and sky. Here, the sound of the letter S is repeated pleasingly, therefore it is alliteration. In the last line of the stanza, at evening it hath died away. Here we find personification, because the poet says died away. He speaks about the gale. Here the term died away is used for wind or gale, which is an inanimate object, and that is treated as human being here. The quality of dying, only living things can die, and therefore it is a personification. Next stanza. On the deck the rover takes his stand. Here the inversion is there, because words are not in correct prose order. The correct prose order is, it should be the rover takes his stand on the deck. Next line is also an inversion. So dark it is, they see no land. Actually, the correct prose order should be, it is so dark, they see no land. In the next highlighted line, we find, for there is the dawn of a rising moon. Here there is paradox, because two opposite ideas are presented in a sentence. Dawn of the moon is an absurd idea, because dawn is a word which is used for sun and not for moon. Now look at the highlighted line. There is interrogation, as a question is asked here. Canst hear? Said one. The breakers roar? In the same line, onomatopoeia is also there, because the word roar echoes the sound of the tidal waves. In the same line we find inversion also, because the actual word order should be, one said, canst hear the breakers roar? Now where we are, I cannot tell. Here, where we, W sound is beautifully repeated, so it is alliteration in the words where we. W sound is pleasingly repeated. In the same line we find inversion also. The correct prose word order should be, now I cannot tell where we are. In the next line we find the repetition of the word I. But I wish I could hear the Inchcape bell. Here the word I is repeated beautifully, and therefore it is repetition. In this line, they hear no sound, the swell is strong. Here we find that the sound of the letter S is pleasingly repeated in words like swell, strong. Here, till the vessel strikes with a shivering shock. The sound of the letter S is repeated in shivering shock. Oh Christ, it is the Inchcape rock. In this line, we find that apostrophe is the figure of speech, because here non-existent person is addressed to. We also find exclamation in the same line, because strong emotion is expressed. Oh Christ. Then this strong emotion of shock and fear is expressed here, and therefore it is, the figure of speech is exclamation. So Ralph the rover tore his hair. Here alliteration is there in Ralph the rover and the words his hair. So the sound H is repeated here. In the next line, he cursed himself in his despair. Here, he himself, here, the H sound is repeated pleasingly, and thus again it is alliteration because close repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words is found. Again, there is an example of alliteration because the S sound is beautifully repeated in ship and sinking. The ship is sinking beneath the tide. And in the last line of the poem, we find the figure of speech is metaphor. The devil below was ringing his knell. Here, metaphor is there because knell, meaning the funeral bell, is indirectly compared with the Inchcape bell. Here, devil is indirectly compared with death. Thus, we have seen the figures of speech in this poem, The Inchcape Rock. Thank you.